My name is Erica Ortega, and I'm going to be explaining to you our lesson format for EDG5414. I am currently a kindergarten teacher, so that is the setting of students that I've made this lesson plan for. Our subject area would be science, and we would be learning about the butterfly life cycle. The essential question for this lesson plan is, what is the butterfly life cycle? Now, some ELL strategies that I would use would be using illustrations and diagrams for those students, and another ELL strategy I would use would be repetition. Now, ESE strategies would be breaking assignments into smaller pieces and allowing those students to have extra time to complete their work. Now, for behavior strategies for those students that may need a little bit more one-on-one or teacher supervision, I would use proximity control and peer support and teacher helper, making them a teacher helper. The materials for this lesson would be the Very Hungry Caterpillar book. I would be in my classroom during this lesson, so I would also use a Promethean board. I would have a butterfly life cycle anchor chart. This one has our vocabulary words. This one has the butterfly life cycle stages. I would also be using different types of dry pasta. I would use dry beads, crayons, construction paper, scissors, and glue. Now, to go ahead and introduce this lesson to my kindergarten students, I would be asking them what they know about butterflies. After a few of them would go ahead and raise their hand and give me responses, I would continue to probe them by asking if any of them knows about the butterfly life cycle. After we go ahead and we have our discussion, I would go ahead and introduce the story, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. Now, this is a great story to engage our students because it talks about the journey of a caterpillar as it makes its way through eating its different foods, and it turns into a beautiful butterfly at the end. So I'm sure that many of you have already read this story, and I truly love reading this story to my kids throughout the school year when we're learning about butterflies. So look at all the fun stuff he eats. Okay, and then eventually the caterpillar will turn into a beautiful butterfly. So after reading the story, I would go ahead and introduce our vocabulary words to our students. So this is an anchor chart that I would have made in my classroom, and this would be pre-made before starting the lesson. And this is the butterfly life cycle vocabulary words. I would introduce life cycle, a series of change, chrysalis, the hard-shelled pupa, and metamorphosis, changes from one stage to another. We would go ahead and together repeat what I'm saying, so I could use that ELL strategy of repetition. Okay. Now, after this, I would also go ahead and now introduce a video that is it's called the Metamorphosis Song by Jack Hartman, and it's a really fun video for our students to go ahead and get excited and get engaged about learning about the butterfly life cycle.
Children's songs, sing and move along. Children's songs, make your brain and body strong. Butterfly egg, caterpillar chrysalis. Butterfly egg, caterpillar chrysalis. Flutter and fly in the sky. That's the life cycle of a butterfly. Changes, changes.
Okay, so that video is about 2 minutes and 25 seconds long, so I'm not going to play the whole thing, but that kind of gave you an idea of what the students would see, and they would eventually start singing along because these songs are really catchy and the kindergarten students really enjoy them. It's also a way of having art and music in the classroom, which is really cool too. So after we listen to that song together, I would go ahead and introduce our next anchor chart, which is the butterfly life cycle stages. I wouldn't have these pre-cut and glued. What I would do is go ahead and I would read each of these little pieces of paper out to the students, and then together we would glue them in the correct order. So stage 1 is the eggs. A girl butterfly lays eggs on a leaf. Stage 2 is the larvae. A caterpillar hatches and it begins to eat and grow. Stage 3 is the pupa. The caterpillar is done growing and it makes a chrysalis. So a pupa is also known as a chrysalis, so I would go ahead and explain that to my students. And then stage 4 is the adult butterfly. A butterfly comes out and it is an adult. So we would read this about 1 or 2 times through repetition so the students are well aware of the different stages of the butterfly life cycle. So finally, after that, I would go ahead and introduce the activity that we would be doing. So this is the worksheet that we would start with. Now, I love to model everything for my students, especially in kindergarten. I love to teach them real life colors and using, appropriate colors for the different animals and backgrounds that we're learning about. So the first thing that I would do would be go ahead and model coloring this worksheet for them so they could see the real life colors of a butterfly. Then I would also introduce the different pieces of pasta and beans that I would be using to describe each part of the butterfly life cycle. So to begin, I would start with a bean, which would be the egg. Then next for the chrysalis would be a shell pasta. Then for the caterpillar would be a rotoni pasta. And then the butterfly would be a bow tie pasta. Now I would model this under my document camera where the students could see it exposed on the Promethean board. So they would see me coloring, then they would watch me model gluing with Elmer's glue each part of the butterfly life cycle. After I had modeled, I would go ahead and pass out one worksheet to each table in the classroom. I would pass out the beans, the rotoni pasta, the bow tie pasta, and the shell pasta to each table. And then together, as in groups, collaboratively, they would go ahead and put the correct shells or the correct dried pastas into the part of the butterfly life cycle. I would walk around, I would monitor, I would help those students that I would need proximity control. I would make sure to be very close to them. Maybe I would have one of my behavior students go ahead and help me pass out the materials that are needed to just make sure that they're engaged. So once I walk around and I make sure that each group has done a successful job of putting the correct pasta and bean where it goes, then I would go ahead and each student would receive their worksheet individually. So the first thing they would do, of course, is writing their name and date. We're very key on that in kindergarten because it's so important to make that a habit. Then they would go ahead and color their butterfly using real life appropriate colors. They could also be creative, but I don't want I'm very picky when it comes to coloring, so I really do like them to use appropriate colors for butterflies. So then after they have finished coloring, then they would go ahead and they would actually glue the correct pastas and beans to to create the butterfly life cycle. Once everyone has finished, I would collect my number, and again, my behavior children, I would go ahead and have them help me or follow me around the classroom while I'm collecting students' work. Okay. After that, to go ahead and finish up our lesson, I would go ahead and replay the Metamorphosis song. So maybe we can play a little bit more from where I left off.
Round like this, it's called metamorphosis.
Now, while they would be listening to the song, I would have all the students stand up and make each step of the butterfly life cycle with their bodies. So then we're engaging them also not only in music, but also in movement, which is so important, especially for the little ones.
Bigger and bigger. The caterpillar hangs in the shape of a J. A chrysalis is formed, the caterpillar is...
Okay. So then after they have finished watching the video again, getting that movement in, I would go ahead and finish off the lesson with exit questions. So questions that I would ask them would be 3 things I learned today, 2 things I found interesting, and 1 question I still have. Now, once again, we want to continue this and make sure that they're getting the exposure at home. So as homework that night, I would go ahead and send home the butterfly life cycle cut and paste activity, where of course the students would write their name and date, they would color the pictures and glue them in the correct order, and then I would probably also take this as a home learning grade. So yeah, I hope that you guys enjoy my presentation, and if you have any questions or comments about my lesson, go ahead and post in the discussion. Thanks, bye guys.